Hello again, students, and welcome to session 2. In this session, we are going to review the important information we have learned in Unit 6. This will help to prepare you for your final project. So please pay attention. Always make sure that you have a pen and paper with you while you watch videos, as you know. It's great to take notes and to use them as they will help you on your final project. So let's begin. So you may be wondering, why review? Reviewing is very helpful for remembering, and it will help you prepare for your final exam, which we're going to talk about in a lot of detail in the next video. But it's very important to review and to remember the important information that is going to help you do a great job on your final exam. So let's go ahead and review the important information from Unit 6. First, we are going to review some of the important vocabulary words that we learned in Unit 6. The first vocabulary word we will review is nearly. 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 Nearly is an adverb that describes adjectives. Nearly means almost, not quite, or not completely. Maybe if something is nearly, it's almost maybe 95%. For example, the water bottle is nearly empty. So here we see nearly as our adverb describing our adjective, empty. So I could say something like, I nearly ran into you. The water bottle is nearly empty. It means almost, almost. Okay, let's go on to our second word. The second word we're going to look at is typical. 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 Typical means it is usual or normal. We can also say it is something happening in the usual way. So it's normal, it is not strange, it is maybe the same every day or all the time. For example, what is a typical day like for you? This means what is your usual normal day like? Or if we look over here, we see some typical banchan that we might see if we go out to a restaurant, right? It means it's usual, it's normal, it's typical. Let's go ahead and go to our vocabulary word number 3. So now let's talk about some fashion vocabulary, as this will be very helpful in your final. So do you remember what we would call those? We would call those ripped jeans. Remember that this sounds like a T. Ripped. Ripped. Ripped jeans, which we see the definition for here. Ripped jeans are very fashionable at times, but maybe they are not appropriate for something like a job interview or going to a wedding or some special occasion. They are casual, right? Casual. So let's say it again. Ripped jeans. Our next term has to do with these shorts. Do you remember what word we would use to describe these shorts? They are not tight, they are baggy. Baggy shorts. Baggy shorts. And here we see the definition for baggy shorts. If clothes are baggy, it means they are very loose and they do not fit very tightly. So again, we could say baggy shorts. We could also say baggy shirt, baggy pants, and so on. Baggy just means it does not fit tightly, but it is loose. Our next term is casual. Casual. So remember, we could say casual style or casual clothes. In both of these pictures, we see a man and a woman wearing casual clothes. And there's our definition. You could also say comfortable style. If you are wearing casual clothes, you can wear things like a t-shirt, a blouse, and jeans. These are casual clothes or casual style. Remember that when we are wearing casual clothes, this might be what we wear when we go shopping, when we go to see friends, or when we are just doing normal everyday activities. Okay, here is our next set of pictures. Do you remember how we would describe what these people are wearing? We would call this formal clothes. We could say formal style or formal clothes. So let's say it again, formal. And there's our definition. So if we look at what these people are wearing, this man, for example, is wearing a suit and a tie, and he's also wearing a button-up collared shirt and some dress shoes. This is very formal. We would call this business formal. The woman is wearing a dress, a blazer, and some heels. So this could also be formal. These are clothes that we wear when we go to work, for example. You could also say conservative style. Conservative style. Our next term, if we look at these pictures, we see that this is a very old style, right? It is not modern. It is not today's style. So we would call this vintage. Vintage. We could say vintage style or vintage clothes, which there we see the definition. And you could also call it retro. Remember that the fashion here is from maybe the 1970s, and this look is very much the 1950s in America. So this is vintage or retro American style clothes. And there's our definition for retro. The last picture and the last vocabulary word we're going to look at is unique. Unique. Unique means it is different from what other people wear. So we could say unique style or unique clothes. This means maybe your fashion does not look like what many other people wear. It's just your personal style or your personal clothes. So we could say unique. And there is our definition. You could also say unusual. Unusual clothes, unusual style. Now that we have reviewed 8 important vocabulary words, let's review the next important thing from Unit 6. Next, let's review disagreeing with people. Remember that this word comes from the word agree. If I agree with you, it means we have the same thinking. If we disagree, it means we have different thinking. For example, if I say chocolate ice cream is the best, and you say strawberry ice cream is the best, we disagree. We have a different opinion. Let's review what we have learned about disagreeing with other people. Let's go ahead and review these expressions that we can use for disagreeing. First, let's look at just simple disagreeing. Before we look at this, when we want to be very polite, we can first say that we understand the other person's point. So this is something we're going to see in the first 3 examples over here. This is a way to be very polite and also to show the person that we care about what they say, but we still disagree. It is not a strong disagreement. It's a way to say, I understand you, but I disagree. I think something different. It is very polite. So let's go ahead and look at these examples. Number 1 is, I know what you're saying, but... So here we're telling the other person, I hear you, I understand you, but I disagree. Number 2, I see what you mean, but... Again, we're saying the same thing. I understand you, but I disagree. Number 3, yes, but, or yes, that may be true, but. So here again, we're telling the person, because we're being very polite, yes, you are correct about that, but I disagree. These are the most polite ways that we can disagree with someone. And the last soft disagreement is, I'm not so sure about that. So these are all polite ways to disagree in a simple and small way. Now let's go ahead. Oh, please excuse me. Now let's go ahead and look at disagreeing more strongly. So here we are not saying, oh, I understand you, you are correct, but I disagree. I see what you mean, I know what you're saying. We use these terms when we really, really strongly disagree with what someone is saying. We are not in agreement with anything they have said. So these are the terms we can use when we strongly disagree. We can say, I'm afraid I disagree. Sorry, but I disagree. That's not true. Or, that's just not true. I totally disagree. I completely disagree. So if we want to be very polite and kind, we can use these terms. But if someone says something that is very, very wrong and we strongly, strongly disagree, we can use these terms over here. Okay? These are all great and can be used in any situation. If you are disagreeing with your boss or teacher or some formal situation, you can use these. You can use these strong disagreements with your friends and people close to you. All right, that's it for disagreeing. Now let's review quantity expressions, which we talked about last week. So these are also expressions that we've learned in Unit 6. So let's go ahead and review what they are and how to use them. You just did a discussion post last week using some of these terms, so I think it will be very fresh in your mind. These are the words that we talked about in your book. Remember that quantity is how much of something there is. So the 6 words and phrases we learned about were none, some, half, a lot, most, and all. So if we give these a percent, right, a number, none is 0%, half is 50%, and the other words are somewhere in the middle. Some could be anywhere between 1 and 49%, and a lot could be 51 to 99. Same with most. So these are words we can use to talk about all kinds of things about quantity. Remember this chart? Let's go ahead and review quantity expressions with specific nouns. Remember, if we are talking about a specific situation, like if I am talking about my friends or using a pronoun like them, I start with my quantity word and then use of. All of my friends live at home. Most of them live at home. Some of them live at home. So we use our quantity word, of, our determiner, which is words like the, that, or my, our noun or pronoun, and then the rest of our sentence. So this is how we have sentences like, a lot of my friends live at home. Some of them live at home. Half of my homework is finished. These are used to talk about specific situations. The other way we can use quantity expressions is with general nouns. So this means that it's about people or things everywhere, not my specific situation. It's about people or things everywhere. And in this case, we do not use of because we're talking about, in this case, all students. All over the world, everywhere, all students study hard. Most water is clean. We do not use of when we're talking about general things or people everywhere, all over the world. We can say, most students study hard. A lot of people enjoy going to see movies. This means everywhere, not just my specific situation. All right, last but not least, let's review what we've learned about giving advice in Unit 6. As you can see in the material section, and as you will read about and hear about in the next lecture, your final video is all about giving advice. So if you have been just sitting watching the video, okay teacher, now is time to snap awake, okay? And please pay extra attention to this section because you are going to be giving advice on your final, okay? So let's begin. Are you ready? So we have seen this chart many times, and we're going to, one more time, go through how to give advice using could, should, ought to, and had better. If you remember, in session 1, we gave fashion advice, like you ought to wear a suit. You had better not wear pajamas. So let's go ahead and review how we make suggestions and give advice using these verbs. Let's start with the verb could. Could is a verb, but it is a special verb. Could is called a modal verb. Modal verbs are verbs that are often used to give advice. Should and ought to are also modal verbs. Let's have a look at the examples here in the chart. You could wear a dress to the party. You could wear the blue dress or the black one. Could is used to make small suggestions or to give advice. It is when we are not giving very strong advice, just a little tiny suggestion to someone. You could do this, you could do that. It's also used to give someone a choice between two or more things. You could have coffee or tea. So could is for small advice and suggestions, and it's a modal verb. Modal verbs always come before other verbs. For example, could go, could eat, and could sleep. Let's use these in a sentence. I could go to school today, or I could stay home. Let's use it with could eat. We could eat pasta or pizza for dinner. And could sleep. I could sleep all day, but I'd have a lot of work to do. So our modal verbs come before our other verbs like go, eat, and sleep. In our examples here, we see you could wear. Wear is the normal verb, and that modal verb could comes before. Next, let's talk about should and ought to. Should and ought to are used to give advice also, but this advice is stronger than just using could. If I say you should do something or you ought to do something, I am not just giving you an option or a small suggestion. I'm telling you, you probably need to do this. You should do this because it will help you or be helpful. Let's look at our examples. You should wear a formal suit to the job interview. Or, you ought to wear a formal suit to the job interview. We can use should, but we can also use the negative form shouldn't, or we could say you ought not to. You ought not wear a formal suit. So let's look at our example here. You shouldn't wear jeans. They're too casual, right? Do not wear jeans to a job interview. We could also say you ought not wear jeans. They're too casual. Should is also a modal verb, and you can use it to give advice, just like ought to. Ought to is considered a semi-modal verb, but that's not very important. We can use it in the same way to give advice like we would the word should. You can use it in just the same way, and as we see in this sentence down here, you can switch back and forth between the two. You should, you ought to. And ought is always followed by the word to. Just like with could, modal verbs always come before other verbs. So, should go, should eat, should sleep, ought to go, ought to eat, ought to sleep. Let's come up with a few examples. You should go to school every day. You don't want to miss class. Now let's use ought to. You ought to eat a healthy breakfast so you feel energetic all day. You should sleep for 8 hours a night. That way you feel rested and ready for the day. In all of these examples, our modal verb, should or ought to, comes before that other verb, and we see it here again with the verb wear. You should wear, you ought to wear, you shouldn't wear. You can also use should in its negative form as should not, and this should also come before other verbs. Should not go, should not eat, should not sleep. You should not go to sleep at 5 a.m. You should not eat too late at night. You should not sleep in class. These are other ways to give suggestions and to tell people what we think they shouldn't do. Last, let's talk about the phrase had better. We can use had better to talk about now or the future. And it's always had, not have. We don't say you have better or she has better. We always use had. You had better, she had better, we had better, I had better, they had better. Always had better. So we do not need to worry about changing that word. And often we shorten it to the apostrophe D. I'd better, you'd better, he'd better, she'd better, when we're in informal situations talking to friends. For example, I could say, you had better go to sleep, but often I'd say, you'd better go to sleep. I might say this to if I had a son or a daughter, hey, you'd better go to sleep. Had better is used to give very strong advice. It's almost like saying you must do this. So when do we give strong advice? We can use had better in important situations, especially if it has something to do with safety or health. Which means a doctor might tell you, maybe they look at your report and they say, you'd better exercise every day. It is used to give very strong advice. Okay, everyone, that's it for our review. Please take the Unit 6 review quiz on eClass to get some practice, and that's it. I'll see you guys in session 3 when we talk about how to do your final project, okay? Bye-bye.